So, all of this is just a setup, right, for what's coming, because what's coming isn't necessarily perfectly structured. I do think it's interesting, and I also think that the students add some really interesting questions. So, Blood Meridian is a really complex text, and famously is complex when we try to think about it in terms of metaphysics or of the divine. Um, One of the things that I've been thinking about is that this is a hero's journey text, which is something I learned from Erin Gwen. Um, and if that's the case, it's an unusual one, but it will still have hallmarks of that form. One important part of that form is that at some point in the text, there's an appearance or intervention of the divine. What the divine is in Blood Meridian is something that people go back and forth about all the time, and it's really cryptic. I think that part of the reason it's cryptic is because McCarthy is doing this thing where if the kid, who in some ways could be seen as an everyman character, is like on this journey. He's one who, uh, fascinatingly to me, is born without a lot of the things that you need to flourish in life, much less to become a hero. See the child, and what do you see? You see this neglectful father who hasn't even bothered to, like, feed his kid, keep him warm, or give him any of the skills that he has as someone who is a school teacher and who knows clearly something about a classical education. Someone like this in particular is a person who's not just going to navigate all the things anyone has to navigate in life, but they're going to have to navigate it from the starting point of deprivation and of lacking a lot of the things that people need to grow, um, and that they need to be heroic. The world itself that McCarthy depicts is very bleak. The West is the perfect setting for this, and we're told on page 5 that shortly after the kid leaves, McCarthy writes, is the human heart something that can be shaped like clay, right? Or do we shape the world around us? Which I think is one way of asking what are the prospects for man in a world like this. The people in this book, they inflict suffering and they suffer, and the desert is almost hell-like in a lot of different ways. I think that McCarthy doesn't have a straightforward answer about what the divine is, but I do think he's almost drawing up two images of the nature of God and what human behavior would mean as a type of worship of a certain kind of God. Well, what do I mean by that? I think the kid is on a path, a non sort of typical hero's journey story, and at every turn, he's presented with a choice between what I think are basically two types of gods. And one of the gods is clearly represented by the judge, and he presents an account of the god of war. But the other god is more of a mystery, and I think it's revealed piece by piece. And it's not revealed necessarily in the words or actions of any one person. Like Judge Holden is clearly the representative of one understanding of the divine. What is this other understanding, though, and how would a human live, right, to worship it? I think that comes out in book 10, and it really orients how to read all of the book for me. I said book 10, but I mean chapter 10. Book 10 of the City of God is really important. So that's kind of where my brain is going with this. It's also very liturgical, and chapter 10 is really liturgical for McCarthy, like whether you're talking about the liturgy of something more traditional or the liturgy of something more esoteric. Either way, it's clear there's some sort of rite happening in chapter 10. For me, chapter 10 is a confrontation between two images or accounts of the divine that just becomes more and more powerful as you continue through the book and watch what happens to the kid. It's a good example of one of the reasons why I have you read ahead a bit more than the lectures track with. Because I told you before, there's an aspect to this that it's like a mystery. And the mystery isn't just kind of what is the judge, what's going to happen to the kid. You know, there's different moments of violence where, you know, it's not completely transparent who does what. The mystery in some ways is in a metaphysical mystery, a mystery about what the nature of the world Cormac is describing is. And I've told you several times now, but we focused on it a lot last time. What is the answer to page 5, where he asks, are we shaping the world, or does the world shape us? You know, I told you right at the very beginning, that's one of the core questions, and we're understanding it through Aristotle and his Ethics and Politics. What we've seen so far is really he's setting up two potential answers. One is an answer that is focused on transaction. Human skins are, and if you have notes, write this down, literal receipts. Glanton calls a scalp a receipt at one point. They're a currency. He also says, in part of what we read out loud in class last time, that we wear the skins of those that come before us, or we wear the skins of other humans in this unending cycle. An unending cycle, according the judge says, that is occurring in front of the eyes of the god of war. That's one part of binary. The other part of the binary we've had less filled out for us, less fleshed out for us. One reason is because we're not even clear, this is a hero's journey, we're not even clear how does the kid fit into that binary. The other side of the binary, the transaction, human receipt side of it, is clearly embodied by the judge. But there's no one figure that is embodying the alternative. We've seen different people who reflect parts of it, like we've seen the barmaid at one point. We've seen that speech we went over closely last time, where at the beginning of book 10, Tobin, who was once a priest, says, as he's watching the kid sort of repair a leather strap, he says, after thinking for a bit that maybe the gifts of God are unfair, that God is tyrannical in some way, because, I mean, the implication is he's tyrannical because he gives gifts unevenly. And the judge, who is this puzzling and terrifying person, seems to have an endless amount of gifts.
the priest starts off reflecting on that, but as he continues to gaze at the kid, and this is page 128 to 129, he has a second thought, a contrasting thought, which is another one of these moments that fills out the alternative to the judge and transaction account for us. The ex-priest looking at the kid says, "Oh, it may be the Lord's way, the distribution of talents, the unequal distribution of talents. Oh, it may be the Lord's way of showing how little store he sets by the learned. Whatever could it mean, meaning learning or talent or skill or power, whatever could it mean to one who knows all? He, the Lord, has an uncommon love for the common man. And godly wisdom resides in the least of things, so that it may well be that the voice of the Almighty speaks most profoundly in such beings as lives in silence themselves." So I told you to pay careful attention to this passage, because this is one of the clearest articulations we have of what the alternative way is, like the alternative to the brutality of the judge's perspective and view, and his account of the nature of the world and of humans in the world. The priest's second reflection here, that whatever is divine, whatever is providential, it has an uncommon love for the common person, and this reveals, and I write this down, something about the nature of the divine, which is that the nature of the divine on this reading, instead of the God of war, you have an account of divinity that speaks most profoundly and through the smallest things. And a part of the lives of those smallest things and why he can speak through them is that they're silent. And so I write that down too. This is an indication to us from McCarthy to keep an eye on the kid, right? We don't have any reason really to see him as a hero. He's a mess, and he has done some awful things and been around some awful things. But it's looking at the kid that causes this character, Tobin, to suspect that God uses the ones who don't appear powerful, the ones who don't appear talented. And who conducts their life in silence. In this whole novel, obviously, the kid. He hardly says anything. Anytime he says anything, I say, what did he say? Like, pay attention to what he said, because he doesn't really talk. And we also don't get a lot of his internal dialogue. So it's really clear, it's a sign from McCarthy. It's the one who is living their life in silence, at least a candidate for this would be the kid. Or maybe, despite all of the things that the kid has done wrong, maybe this is a quality that allows the divine to show itself in him. And the priest continued, "For let it go how it will, God speaks in the least of creatures." This is the other part of that dichotomy we've been talking about. You have the judge who worships the God of war, who speaks about all human interactions as transactional, and who sees humans as commodities, like literal commodities. Their flesh is a receipt. And then on this other side, which we don't really have any big moments for. We don't have any big words. We don't have any big incidents. We don't have anything as showy or grand as the judge. So when you're thinking about the alternative, you've just got these little flickers. Like I said, one of the flickers the barmaid. There's a bit of a flicker when you guys analyze the church scene after the kid gets drunk. This is another one of those flickers, and maybe the one we've seen the most so far. What we can say about this alternative is that instead of the divine being a thing of power and destruction, the divine speaks in the least, in the small, in the weak. And this should surprise you, because you've been reading McCarthy long enough by this point to know he's not a sentimentalist. like you might expect me or like a Care Bear mom or something to be like, oh yes, God speaks through the leads of preachers, and it's important to be humble, da da da, right? You might expect that from me, but would you expect that from McCarthy? No. Okay, the world McCarthy's describing is very vicious, very tumultuous, and he doesn't hold back on any of it. And he's not a man who lived a particularly great life himself. What is the alternative he's pointing out here? The antidote, the other way of living, the other way the world could be, is a world where it's not power that actually matters. It is the small that reveal the divine. The least of creatures. The kid clarifies for us, in case the reader doesn't get it. McCarthy says, well, the kid thinks, and this is one of the few times we get a little bit of exposition about the kid's internal feelings. The kid thinks that the priest is talking about like birds or something. But just in case the reader was thinking that too, he tells us, no, he's talking about men. No man is give leave of that voice. What voice? The voice that speaks through the least of creatures. A contrast to the God of War that Holden goes on and on and on about. Now, we have a lot of things to go through today, but I wanted to remind you of that because we're uncovering it bit by bit. And that's part of what I mean by putting together a metaphysical mystery. How do I want to do this? Any good things to the judge, who is clearly evil, is the implication. But the longer he looks at the kid for, then this is when he opens up this other possibility. Actually, no, instead of looking at the judge and seeing in it a condemnation of God, seeing in his way a condemnation of God, it's teaching you this is not what God cares about. That's whether or not we want to talk about it in terms of metaphysics or theology, this is a model of the type of critical thinking I've been trying to work on all semester with you. The priest starts with one analysis, and as he thinks through it more, he realizes, well, this tension, this contradiction may be indicating something else to me. What it may be showing me not is that God should be condemned because he loves power so much. What it may be showing me is that God doesn't give a fuck about any of those things that the judge represents. And he chooses something else. He chooses the words he uses here. The Almighty speaks most profoundly in such beings as live silent lives. He speaks in the least of creatures, but not birds. McCarthy is clear. Humans. This shows how little an all-powerful God would care about human power and human learning. And we're also told that this divinity has, quote, an uncommon love for the common man. The kid is literally called the kid. He doesn't have a name, he has a generic name. This is like saying every man. Every man. So this is one moment that we know, if we're talking about, in the hero's journey, there's a revelation of something that is beyond the natural. This is, like I said, the half of the binary that gets launched here. We're also told, though, and this is really important, that we learn not just something about what he thinks the nature of the divine is, we learn what he thinks about the human response to it. The human response has to be to listen. Okay, because that's when he goes on to talk about, man must hear this voice, And the kid says, I ain't never heard it. And then the priest brings up, yeah, when we're sleeping, we don't hear these animals eating their food. But when they stop eating, we all wake up because on some subconscious level, we do. And we're scared if they stop eating, that it means danger's around. It means we're in danger. Okay, so that, bracket that. What is the alternative? The other sort of, the whole book proceeds by this binary, right? The other path, the other way. What's the other one? Well, it's clearly in the form of the judge. And the way we find out about it, this is the other big mystical revelation moment. If you're thinking about the supernatural intervening into the life of the hero, this is how it happens. Again, it is the ex-priest who reveals the message. And the way he does it is by giving a kind of like sort of origin story of how the judge came to be with the gang. If this part where he talks, the ex-priest talks about the divine's uncommon love for the common man, is very brief. This part, this sort of revelation of the divine is very long, very wordy, very complex, and just in terms of how much space it takes up, really long. The other one took up maybe a page at most. This takes up the rest of the chapter. After the ex-priest gives this little speech about God using the least of creatures and the voice that man hears, the first thing the kid says, and this shows you how that he's smart, right? He may be a lot of things, but he's smart. First thing he says is, and the judge, does the voice speak to him? This is interesting too, because this is more interaction, more reflection into what the kid cares about or what he's wondering than we normally get. And he's basically saying, does the judge follow this God that you're talking about, or this divinity you're talking about? Tobin doesn't really answer him in a direct way. Instead, he answers him through a story. And he says, every man in the company claims to have encountered that sooty-souled rascal in some other place. Sooty-souled could mean dirty-souled, but here, heavy-handed devil imagery, right? Where's the devil? He's in hell. What's in hell? Fire and brimstone, right? So this guy, he's sooty-souled. He's got, ashes and brimstone on him. Every man in the company claims to have seen him before, right? In some random place. So you have this seemingly random group of men that have formed this gang, and yet all of them say, we saw the judge before, right? The next thing we find out is that the second time every member of the gang saw the judge was when they were together. Okay, when they were together. And at this point, we know, because this is a flashback basically, that the kid is not in this, the Toadvine's not in it, right? None of the guys that came out of the jail are here. It's everyone from before. And he says, the judge, saved us all. I have to give him that. We come down off the Little Colorado. We didn't have a pound of powder in the company. So they're, on their murderous mission, and they're in trouble because if they were to come upon somebody, they don't have any gunpowder, right? So they would be SOL. However, you find out a little more as you keep going that there's even a more urgent problem. It's not just if they run into some randoms that they're in danger. It's that they had killed a bunch of indigenous people, and that because of this, they had to like hide in a cave for 9 days. They lost most of their horses, and in the process of, attacking this group of people, they they killed so many that they ran out of gunpowder. Okay, that's important. You also find out at this point that they didn't fare very well. There had been 38 men when they began the attack, when they began to look around and try to kill people. When they're done with this particular encounter, there's only 14 left. Okay, so they're not faring well. There's been a lot of death. They don't have gunpowder then because they killed a bunch of people. So if they killed a bunch of people, odds are they're being tracked now. Why do they have to hide? Because people are looking for them, right, to get revenge. So they are being pursued by the people they attacked, and they're out of gunpowder. It's a big problem. They're being looked for to be killed, and they have no way to defend themselves. This is when they see the judge. Okay, that's very important. This very desperate moment when basically they're waiting to die is when they see the judge. And at first, Brown, who's one of the members of the gang, thinks he's imagining something. It says on 131, Brown thought him a mirage. Okay. Now, he says at the bottom, then about the meridian of that day. So that means when the day kind of reaches its peak, sun's reaching its peak, we come upon the judge on his rock, there in that wilderness, by his single self. And there was no rock, just the one. Irving, that's another group member, said he'd brung it with him. I said it was a mere stone for to mark him out of nothing at all. He had with him that self-same rifle you see with him now, all mounted in German silver, and the name that he'd give it set with silver wire under the check piece and lantern, et in Arcadio ego. It's Arcadia, actually. A reference to the lethal in it. Common enough for a man to name his gun. I've heard Sweet Lips and Hark from the Tombs and every sort of lady's name. His is the first and only ever I seen with an inscription from the classics. What should that bring up for you as a reader? Okay, so you psychotic, say a little more. Mm-hmm. They love relishing how smart they are. Oh, okay. You can really just do anything. Okay, right. So we're really, this is almost Marvel super villain comic level stuff, right? Like, what it means, it's super fucked up. Basically, what does it mean? A paradise, and that even in paradise there's death. Like that's his right. Paradise. At in Arcadio ego is a way of saying, even in paradise, I am still there. The I in the phrase is death, right? But him choosing this inscription, on the one hand, it tells you, like you said, it's kind of psychotic, right? We also, if you think of like serial killers and stuff, they always have bizarre things that they personalize, and like, Dahmer showing Exorcist 3 every time before he, starts to kill and chop up a guy. They have little things that have a significance to them, and that, kind of show you this person is maybe a little off. And in the story of their killing, that thing plays a role. And then the what it means itself, right, is basically there's no way to escape death and suffering. Even in heaven, you can't outrun it, which means what? That whatever divinity heaven represents or runs, that it is less powerful than the evil of human suffering. It's also personalized. Even in heaven, am I death? But it's also, am I the judge, the guy holding this gun? So there's an equation now between him and death. Lastly, the fact that you see this return of the classics, it should remind you of his dad. Okay, in the beginning, you're told that his father knows, basically the languages of these of the liberal arts, right, of the past. The kid isn't even literate, right? And there's something that should be eerie to you about this too. There he sat, no horse, just him and his legs crossed, smiling as we rode up like he'd been expecting us. He had an old canvas kit bag and an old woolen Benjamin over the one shoulder. In the bag was a brace of pistols and a good assortment of specie, gold and silver. So money, right? Gold and silver coins. He didn't even have a canteen. It was like you couldn't tell where he'd come from. Said he'd been with a wagon company and fell out to go it alone. If you guys listen to like any paranormal podcasts or like any shows where people call in and they're like, this is this really creepy thing that happened to me or whatever, the creepiness of this might hit you more. Like when you're reading it in a book, at least for me, the first time I read it, I think part of it went over my head. But this is massively disturbing. They are in the middle of the desert. Okay, there's nothing around. And the guy thinks, Brown thinks, it has to be a mirage. Well, why? Because he's tired or whatever. Yeah, maybe. But also because what he's seen can't be explained. Yes.
Okay, so when I read it, I was just like, I don't know, throughout the whole entire book, the whole entire thing I kept thinking was this, coming back to this.
Yeah, good.
Because I was like, that is so unreal. I know like the book is supposed to be unrealistic, but like that was even unrealistic for the book.
Good, very good.
I'm thinking about how you just said like the judge is like how a hero journey has like the mystical thing about it. I think the judge is probably is that mystical thing, and they're showing us this and like he knew like how he knows like Judge Berman, I think, in so many different languages.
Right.
And I forgot you said it before, like I've been around a lot of Dutch people, I could never learn that in all my life.
Yes.
And it's like,
good.
How does he know that? How is he so old to know that? And now I just like the guy just pointed out the Greek rich Egypt's gun that is so old. Like how does he know all of that type of stuff?
Right. Good. Right.
Like, he's being
yes.
He has no hair, so you can't really tell his age.
Okay, excellent job on so many levels, right? So first of all, we have this inscription that A is coming from an much older civilization that a lot of people in the West aren't gonna like be educated into. And then the inscription itself is very disturbing, right? Then we already know this guy knows actually a ton of other languages. And all of these experiences he's had, he's even learned this language, right? That the priest says, I couldn't, and this man, he had to have known languages. He's an ex-priest. They tell you earlier, like a little bit more, not very much, but he's like someone who's trained in a seminary, which would mean he'd have to know some amount of languages at that time. So, the judge has this encyclopedic knowledge that makes you feel like he would have had to have been everywhere. But at this time in the world, who has been everywhere, right? It's uncanny. You're starting to wonder what's going on. But then, like you pointed out, well, maybe someone could know all this if they were old. But we know, it's this giant baby sitting in the desert. Okay, he has no hair at all. He doesn't seem to have wrinkles. His skin is always described as being plump and smooth. And he's about 7 feet. So he's massive, massive man, really heavy, completely hairless, no wrinkles on him, sitting on a rock in the middle of the desert. That should be terrifying. If a friend told you that that happened to them, you would think they were on something, or you would be scared for them, right? That something really bad had happened. And this, like you said, it also points to, well, he's not the super old guy who could have had all of these chances to learn all these things. You're right. This is the moment when the book has been written in this very realistic way. The language is still really realistic. All of your alarm bells of this is not a human should be going off. You know, the method and the tone and the prose aren't changing. What he's describing has to be supernatural. It has to be. There's not. Then add to that, in addition to this, he's sitting in the middle of this desert where people still die in the desert. I mean, every year I see news stories about people dying in the deserts in California because they get lost or they didn't bring enough water or whatever. And like, this is in our time. We've got cell phones, we've got all kinds of things. Deserts are deadly, right? There's literally nothing around. And he is sitting on one rock in the whole space. There's nothing else for him to even be sitting on. There's literally, it's all blank, except for this rock he's perched on with his legs crossed, and he's smiling like he's waiting for them. He doesn't have a horse. How did he get there? Did he walk there? Who could have walked there? Well, maybe someone could walk there who maybe was very lucky and had a lot of water. Nope. We're told in the next few words, he didn't even have a canteen. So he's plopped in the middle of the desert like he's waiting for them on the one rock in the entire space without a horse and with no water. And he's smiling. He's looking happy. He's not stressed. He's not like, help me or whatever. He looks like he's in good health. He's in good spirits. He's not panicking. He's got pistols and he's got money. No water, nothing like that a human would need. Pistols and money. And he says he'd been with a wagon company and fell out to go it alone. You couldn't tell where he had come from. Now, Davy wants to leave him there. Why? Because, like, I would want to leave him there. I mean, if you guys got, heaven forbid, if you guys were like really drunk one night and then you got lost in some dark rural area in your car, and then your car broke down in the middle of the woods, and then you're like out there, you know, walking around trying to find something, you know, your phone's got no service, and it's pitch black, and then in a tree, you see the 7-foot man, like with skin like a baby's, no hair anywhere, and he's sitting cross-legged and he's looking at you like that. What would you do? Would you go up to him and be like, hello, sir, will you help me? No, right? That's horrifying. This is like the hills have eyes or something bad. Something bad is going to happen. You need to get out of there. So that's not, Davy's like, yeah, okay, we're leaving this guy. We need to get away. But remember, they're in this desperate situation. And so Glanton's looking at him. It says, Glanton just studied him. It was a day's work to even guess what he, Glanton, made of that figure on that ground. I don't know to this day. This is a really important line. If you got your text, open it to 132, underline it. If you've got notes, write it down. They've a secret commerce. They've a secret commerce. So one of the things we know about this alternative mode in the book that the judge represents is this idea of the transactional, right? You can think about that as commerce. They've a secret commerce. So Glanton looks at him, right? The priest says, I don't know what he was thinking. But they've a secret commerce. Some terrible covenant. Okay, so first they have some secret exchange. Then they have some terrible covenant. A terrible covenant is a deal. A covenant's a deal. Normally you hear the word covenant is higher than contract. It can have a religious overtone. Some terrible covenant. You mine, you'll see I'm right. So in the priest's depiction, at least, everyone else is not comfortable around this man. They want to get away from him. They're in desperate straits. They're looking like, they're probably going to die. And there's only 14 left of them out of 38. But Glanton sees this totally unsettling scene and is like, all right. And in that moment, the implication is he's made some sort of deal. He's made some sort of deal. You mind, you'll see I'm right. He, Glanton, called for the last 2 pack animals we had, and he cut the straps and left the wallets to lay where they fell, and the judge mounted up, and he and Glanton rode side by side, and soon they was conversing like brothers. Is Glanton someone who just starts conversing with people like brothers? Yes, good, right? Okay, so one of the things is we know just kind of by extension that they've had to have some sort of encounter before.
It's the only way they all could have made it.
Well, does Glanton, play a role in this meeting? Say more.
Because usually people make deals like this so that they can get power over the group that they're in control of.
Mm-hmm.
You make people be so desperate that they see you in a different light. You're not just their leader, you're their savior.
Right.
But yet he's just walking into also becoming that with the judge. Even though the judge is the savior, the judge is gonna be in control of him now. Even though I feel like obviously because that guy is also trying to be a leader.
Right. Good. No.
I'm just
good.
He's just gonna have to be under the judge.
It's so embarrassing. Okay, so first of all, I hear you. I agree.
That's probably not what he intended at all.
Right. Glanton is the leader. This is something that we've figured out. We've sort of noted. He's supposed to be the one in charge. There's several moments where it's really clear he's taking his direction from the judge. Is Glanton someone that seems submissive or like he'd take orders from anyone? No. He's a cold-blooded killer. He's really aggro, and he's got a lot of problems, right? He wants to be the leader of this group. There's something that has made him submissive toward the judge and has made him sort of leave behind his el jefe persona, at least when they interact, right? And like you said, if he's really supposed to be this big, tough leader, this is an embarrassment. But someone like the judge, what they do is, as you pointed out, they take advantage of circumstances and perhaps even create circumstances where you look to them as who saved you, right? And this is the appeal of the transactional commerce and the terrible covenant. So even Glanton, who in a lot of ways would seem to be someone who would resent this type of thing, right, is inviting it in, right, and is inviting it in because there's something he thinks he's going to get out of it. Yes?
Yeah, okay, that makes it more obvious then. That means he has to. Okay, yeah, that's so easier. That means he has a rival. And there's just no other
Or good, it's good, right? Is this a rival and there's no other way he can beat him? I think that's a good way, a good option to put on the table right now. Another possibility, though, is that he somehow in his mind thinks he's going to stay in control of the covenant. That he thinks, you hear about this, people use the phrase making the deal with the devil, right? And it just means you're making a deal with something really dangerous, but you think you're going to remain in control. And so this is another possibility with him. So, all the men are astonished by this. This is really uncharacteristic behavior from Glanton. Let's see. By then, Glanton had given him the particulars of the situation in which he'd installed himself. But if being naked of arms in that wilderness and half of all Apacheria in pursuit worried him at all, he kept it to himself entirely. Okay, so Glanton tells him what had happened. We committed this massacre. We are being pursued. We've run out of gunpowder. Judge, if he's in the desert and he's stranded and then he finds a gang and then you find out this gang is being pursued and has no way of defending himself, he might start to get nervous and be like, oh, well, this might actually not be a better circumstance for me. No, he's not worried at all. He's not worried at all. And in fact, he points out a range of mountains, maybe 30 miles distance, and we pulled for those mountains. None of us asked what for. Now, what do you reckon it was in them mountains that we set out for? How did he, the judge, come to know of it? How to find it? How to put it to use? Okay, so why would the judge even, first of all, know that these mountains are going to be there, much less that they would be important or have anything that could help them? Tobin seemed to frame these questions to himself. He was regarding the fire and pulling on his pipe. How indeed, he said. Okay, and now they can see, once they make progress more and they're in the foothills of those mountains, they still don't have water, even. They don't have any wood. And they can see the people that are chasing them coming, right? So they know that their enemies are on the trail. The judge had been up all the night watching the bats. He would go up the side of the mountain and make notes in a little book, and then he would come back down. He could not have been more cheerful. This is another uncanny moment. They're in a really desperate situation. He's not worried about it. He could not have been more cheerful. 2 men had deserted in the night. Okay, things are so bad that 2 guys, even though it's a really dangerous place to be on your own in, 2 guys actually leave because they are thinking this is just going to go badly, right? We're not sticking around. This is just certain death. We have more of a chance on our own. Now there's 12 of them, and the judge makes 13. This is an illusion. 12 apostles and 1 Christ. It's not clear yet. As we keep going, you're going to see why I'm saying that, but there's a reason McCarthy makes it 12 and 1. I gave him my best study, the judge, then and now. He appeared to be a lunatic and then not. Glanton, I always knew, was mad. Okay, as they keep going, the judge would stop to botanize. So he would hang back from the group to sketch plants and try to classify them. My hand to God. Pressing leaves into his book. Sure, I never saw the equal to it. Okay, and this is why they're being pursued, and the people pursuing them are getting closer and closer. They make it further. It's dusk. The judge says, let's change course again. And he's following the bats. He's following the bats. They set around in the dark, right? As it the sun goes down. And when the judge comes back from following the bats, he starts to talk to Glanton. Nobody knows what they're saying, but they're whispering. They keep going in the dark. And this is something else that is really unusual. It's unusual, again, that Glanton's agreeing to it. There's no trail. So not only are they traveling in the dark, but they're traveling in a really rocky area, like in a heightened elevation, without a path. When we reached the cave, some of the men thought he meant for us to hide there. But it was the niter you see. Okay, so there's something in the cave that they can use to start to make gunpowder. The judge, we left him at a high pass, a little Clearwater Creek, him and one of the Delawares, that's a tracker. He told us to circle the mountain and return to the place like where they were at in 48 hours. We unloaded all the containers of niter on the ground, and then they started to do what he said. They watched him go. Tobin looked at the kid. Never in this world. I thought Glanton would leave him. Basically, this is insane. Like, he's telling us to walk around in a circle for 48 hours around the mountain. We're being pursued. We don't have water. We're already near death. This is crazy. But Glanton is doing it. I thought Glanton would leave him, but he didn't. We went on. The next day on the far side of the mountain, we encountered the two lads we saw on the other, because it's a 2-day circling that they're doing around the mountain. And it says that the next day, when they made it to the far side of the mountain, they see the two lads that had deserted them, right, who left in the night before because they were scared. They were hanging upside down in a tree. They'd been skinned. Now, Tobin assumes that the people who skin them are the natives that are pursuing them, right? But it's not clear that that's what happened. And he says, if the people pursuing us hadn't guessed already, they know from meeting these men that we don't have any powder. So they know even more about our desperate situation. We can't ride the animals. We can just lead them, okay? But in those 2 days, the judge had leached out the wano with creek water and wood ash and precipitated it out. Okay, so he's using the bat poop with water and ash. And he's created like some sort of combination out of it. It's become solid. And he built a clay kiln and burned charcoal in it, doused the fire by day, and fired it again come the dark. Okay, so again, he's not acting like there's any urgency. When we found him and the Delaware was sitting in the creek stark naked, they appeared at first to be drunk, but on what, none could surmise, because there's no access to alcohol. They're like out of a bunch of stuff. So he gets up when he sees them, and he comes back with a pair of wallets, and in one was about 8 pounds of pure crystal saltpeter, and in the other about 3 pounds of fine alder charcoal. He'd ground the charcoal to a powder in the hollow of a rock. You could have made ink out of it. That's how fine he got it, which is impressive in those conditions. He lashed the bags shut and put them across the pommel of Glanton's saddle, and him and the Indian got their clothes. I was glad for it. I never seen a grown man with not a hair to his body, and him weighing 24 stone which he did then and does now. He says, I didn't want to see him naked, right? We go down the mountain with no scouts. That's dangerous, nothing, just straight out. We're dead for sleep, so we're sleep deprived. It's dark. When we reach the plain, we take a head count. The moon was about 3/4 full and waxing, and we were like circus riders, not a sound, the horses on eggshell. Okay, they don't know where their pursuers are. But the moon is really bright, which is another weird thing about this moment. They come upon a band of wolves that scatter. They see an antelope. In all this time, the judge had spoke hardly a word. Now dawn has come, right? And his honor, the judge, takes up a position. So that he takes up the position on some lava rocks. And he commences to give an address. Okay, so now he's going to give a speech. Okay, so he goes and he perches himself on these rocks. The implication, I think, is like he's kind of higher than the men. He's going to talk at them. It was like a sermon. Okay, McCarthy's laying it on thick. So first, there are 12 of them left, and then an extra, the judge, which makes 13. Now he's getting on some rocks. Sermon on the Mount, anyone? And he's going to give a sermon unlike anything the priest, who would have been hearing sermons all the time, had ever heard. Okay, so it's a very bizarre sermon that he gives. He delivered himself of an oration, to what end I know not, then or now. And he concluded with the telling us that our mother, the earth, as he said, was round like an egg and contained all good things within her. Then he turned and led the horse he'd been riding across that terrain of black and glassy slag, treacherous to man and beast alike, and us behind him like the disciples of a new faith. If you're underlining things, you want to underline this. Okay, so now the ex-priest breaks off. He stops talking. And he looks at the judge. Now he looks back at the kid. The Malpais, it was a maze. Okay, you'd run out upon a little promontory and you'd be balked about by the steep crevices. You wouldn't dare to jump them. So he's basically, this area is very narrow, very hard to pass, very easy to fall down. They're leading the horses with every care. The rocks that they're walking on are sharp and black. Okay, so they're volcanic. There's also flinty rocks. Our boots are cut to pieces. The horse's feet are bleeding. Well, the horse's hooves, I guess, is the right thing to say. I'd not go behind scripture, which is weird for him to say because he's an ex-priest. But it may be that there has been sinners so notorious evil that the fires cough them up again, and I would well see in the long ago how it was little devils with their pitchforks had traversed that fiery vomit for to salvage back those souls that had by misadventure been spewed up from their damnation onto the outer shelves of the world. So here he's saying, you know, this place is so evil, so treacherous, so hard, that you almost feel like it's a place where people who were too evil for hell had been like spewed back up onto the earth. It's a weird thing to say. The judge, he seemed not to take his eyes from that dead cone where it rose off the desert like a great canker. And we followed as solemn as owls. So now they're going to climb that high mountain that they spied. And the people pursuing them are only 10 miles away. So they're really close. I looked at the men about me, and sure, they didn't look much. The dignity was gone out of them. That's an interesting word, guys, because I'd even circle it, like if you're marking on your text, the dignity was gone out. That is a very odd word choice, because it could have been anything else. It could have been the bravery, the happiness. They're tired, they're beaten down, they're facing death. All of these things, there's lots of ways you could describe it. McCarthy is describing a quality that is primarily about the soul, I think. Their dignity is gone. Well, we normally associate dignity with a regard for human agency, human freedom, human independence. It is their dignity that is gone. They were good hearts, all, then and now, and I did not like to see them so. I thought the judge had been sent among us for a curse, and yet he proved me wrong. At the time he did, but I'm of two minds again now. So what's he going to do next? Well, first of all, at their destination, there's a gaping hole. He starts chipping away at it. What comes out? What is he chipping away at? It's brimstone, okay? McCarthy is laying it on thick. Brimstone, this hell rock. Now, he's adding sulfur. Okay, how much heavier-handed can we get? A wheel of brimstone all about the rim of the cauldron, bright yellow and shining here and there with the little flakes of silica, but most pure flowers of sulfur. We chipped it loose, so they're digging into this hole, and we chop it fine with our knives till we had about 2 pounds of it. Now the judge goes back and he gets those wallets we told you about earlier, right? And remember, the wallets had, I think it was saltpeter and fine charcoal. And he goes to a cupped place in the rock and he dumps out what's in the wallets. He dumps out the charcoal. And he dumps out the niter that they found in the cave. And he stirs them up with his hands. And now he adds the sulfur. This line is important. I didn't know, but what we'd be required to bleed into it like Freemasons, but it was not so. Okay, guys, this is getting spookier. Freemasons, now in a lot of ways, it's just like a social club. But at the time of, at this time in the West, it's a more powerful esoteric organization that does practice kind of these rituals that are odd. And part of what they would do in Europe and in America would be they put blood into their building materials. And the idea is that this would make it stronger. So it's one of the rituals that you could do. So the ex-priest is so freaked out that he's thinking, this is Freemasonry, this is some weird ritual. We're going to have to bleed into this thing that he's made. But it's not so. Okay, that's not what happens. What happens instead? They can see the men chasing them coming closer and closer from where they are. And at that time, the judge is standing, the great hairless oaf. He took out his pizzle and he was pissing into the mixture, pissing with a great vengeance, and one hand aloft, and he cried out for us to do likewise. Okay, so they're not going to put blood in this thing. They're going to put urine. They're going to pee into it. We were half mad anyways. We're already crazy. All lined up, Delawares and all. Every man save Glanton, and he was a study. We hauled forth our members, and at it we went, and the judge on his knees, kneading the mass with his naked arms, and the piss was splashing about, and he was crying out to us to piss, man, piss for your very souls. For can't you see the redskins yonder? And laughing the while, and working up this great mass, and a fall, black dough, a devil's batter by the stink of it, and him, not a bloody dark pastry man himself, I don't suppose. He pulls out his knife. He commences to trowel it across the south-facing rock, spreading it out thin with a knife blade and watching the sun with one eye. Him smeared with blacking and reeking of piss and sulfur, and grinning and wielding the knife with a dexterity that was wondrous. Okay. The people chasing them are getting closer and closer. There's a tracker that is getting up nearer to them on the naked rock. Then they seen us. Well, God in his glory knows what they thought. They were scattered out across the lava. One of them pointed, and they all looked up, thunderstruck, no doubt, to see 11 men perched on the topmost rim of that scalded atoll like mist-flown birds. Okay, they parlayed. We watched to see would they dispatch any of their number after the horses, but they did not. Their greed overcame all else. They started for the base of the cone, scrambling over the lava to see who would be first. We had about an hour left, basically, he says, before they would get to us. And they're watching what the judge has made drying out on the rocks. One by one, we give up. The judge was sitting making entries in his little book, and he sees them coming as much as they do, but he's not disturbed. No one spoke. There was none to curse and none to pray. We just watched. And that cloud just cut the corner from the sun and passed on, and there was no shadow fell upon us. The judge took up his ledger, went on with his entries as before. I watched him. Then I clambered down, tested a patch of the stuff with my hand. There was heat coming off of it. I looked at Glanton, and he was watching the judge. He seemed to have had his wits stole. Well, the judge closed up his little book. He took his leather shirt and spread it out in the little cup place and called for us to bring the stuff to him. Every knife was out. We went to scraping it, right? We heaped it in the shirt. And Captain Glanton, he calls out. Captain Glanton. Would you believe it? So that's what you're pointing to, right? Captain Glanton. He's clearly in charge, and he's calling him come over. Would you believe it? Captain Glanton, he says, come charge that swivel bore of yours. He's giving him orders. And let's see what manner of thing we have here. Glanton comes up with his rifle. He scoops his charger full. He charges both barrels and patches 2 balls and drove them home and capped the pieces and made to step to the rim. That was never the judge's way. Down the maw of that thing, he says, and Glanton never questioned it. He went down the pitch with the inner rim to where lay the terminus of that terrible fluid, held his piece out over it and pointed it straight down and caught the hammer and fired. He fired both barrels. He looked at us. He looked at the judge. The judge just waved and went on with his grinning, and then he called us all to fill our horns and flasks, and we did, one by one, circling past him, underline this, like communicants. He made gunpowder for them. And it's ready just in the nick of time because their pursuers are very close. They're literally, he says, not more than a furlong on the slope. They fire the pistols. They space out the shot. It would have brought tears to your eyes. All dead, save me, he called. Have mercy on me, todos muertos, todos. Waving the shirt, he's waving around his watch shirt. God had set them yapping on the slope like dogs. He turns to us with that smile of his. He says, gentlemen, and that was all he said, right? And he commenced to kill the Indians. We needed no second invitation. God, it was a butchery. At the first fire, we killed around a dozen. We did not let up. And here, you see him use a racial slur again. This is that transactional, like the height of this transactional brutality that the judge embodies, right? He's piling up bodies that he's denigrating them in the language. They're slaughtered, like they're dehumanized. This is like that moment when Glanton calls the old Mexican woman's scalp a receipt. And they kill so many that they make a chain, their bodies do, about the base of our mountain. It was a sand, what it was. Not a misfire in the batch with that queer powder. The ex-priest turned and looked at the kid. Okay, so look, we're at the end of this chapter. The whole chapter is just the retelling, except for the very small part in the beginning with the alternate view of the divine. That was the judge, the first I ever saw him. He's a thing to study. The kid looked at Tobin. This is a really important question, guys. What's he a judge of? The kid says. What's he a judge of? Tobin repeats. What's he a judge of? Tobin glanced off across the fire. Ah, lad, he said. Hush now. The man will hear ye, his ears like a fox. And that's odd, because he's been talking the whole time. If he has ears like a fox, couldn't the judge have heard everything that the priest just said? It's something about the question, what's he the judge of, right? And Tobin basically says, be quiet, he'll hear you. There's something dangerous in that question. Also remember at the beginning when we're talking about this alternative view of the divine, that part had ended with the kid asking, does the judge hear the voice of God? And the priest, or the ex-priest, Tobin, doesn't answer. He doesn't answer. So from this, we have two questions that come from the kid. A, does the judge hear the voice of God? That's a way of asking, is he from God? No answer from the priest, or at least not a direct answer. The next question, what is he the judge of? Those are the two questions the kids ask. What's he the judge of? Doesn't get an answer, and there's something about this question that would put the kid in danger. Now, just, in case it's not clear enough, this is, I said, the alternative mystical account. In the hero's journey, there's always this moment the divine comes in. Had that little spot with Tobin talking about how God loves the least of creatures. And then this very, very, very wordy alternative appearance of the divine in the figure of the judge appearing in the desert in this really disturbing way and saving them. He is a savior. That's part of what's really odd about it. You're told that, first of all, it's Glanton who makes the deal with him. A transactional commerce, which is described as a terrible covenant. And like you pointed out, he's oddly submissive to him. He's even taking orders from him by the end. The things that the judge asks them to do as they're being chased get crazier and crazier, and they keep complying. They eventually get down to 12 group members. And out of sulfur, brimstone, I think it's called Peter or saltpeter, niter, and urine. Oh, and charcoal. And remember, he's made this partly out of bat shit. He made this combination partly out of bat shit and water. I know, right? Then he creates gunpowder from this. On the third day. I told you it was heavy-handed. Before they make this thing where he says, piss for your lives, man, he gives a speech on a rock, a sermon. Then he tells them to piss for their lives. They piss into this thing. He kneads it with his hands, turns it into the gunpowder out of this stuff. What is he doing? What is he presenting himself as? A priest, quite literally. And what kind of priest? This is where it gets weird, because McCarthy has a bizarre relationship with Catholicism. It's hard to explain. He's not like pious by any means. This is literally a simulacrum or an inversion of the Catholic Mass. In the Catholic Mass, the theology is that it's the body and blood of Christ, literally, that is made from what? Wheat and wine, that comes out of the labor of our hands and our participation in the prayer, right? Which is presented after a big sermon. And then somehow the God, like the divine, transforms these human things into the body of Christ. That is called transubstantiation. Then you take it, the communion, in you, and the idea is now you have God in you, and you're supposed to, I mean, in theory, be transformed by it. Transformed into what? Transformed into the God, right? By doing good deeds, by doing whatever. This is the theology. I'm bringing all that out because this is a parallel to that. Okay? They present these materials. It is a work of their hands, right? He gives a speech before. They put their actual piss in it. And then they all come up, he says, like communicants. And they take from him what he has transformed from these human elements into gunpowder. Their communion, their host, is gunpowder. Why? Because instead of like taking like the divine to do good deeds of mercy or whatever after taking communion, like in theory, they're taking their communion, which is the transubstantiation, miraculous, that's part of my point, miraculous transubstantiation from earthly materials into gunpowder, which they take and they use to slaughter. They use to kill. It's a total mimicry. It's really intentional on the part of McCarthy. These are two different paths. This is the most ritualistic that this gets. And you actually have in this the implication then that there are two kinds of sacrifice, and I write this down on the table because this is something you guys have brought up before. The transactional model sacrifices others to your ends. And ultimately, you know, we learn from the judge's speech about what the Meridian is, that he wants to get men at the height of their power and their deadliness and yank them into death. So not only are they going to sacrifice the lives of others, but then they themselves are a sacrifice, he says to the god of war. We don't have much detail of the alternative sketch yet, but here we're getting a little bit more by implication. There's got to be another model of sacrifice that's on the table. But we only know it by its inversion at this point, which he has spent pages and pages describing in a really heavy-handed way. Okay, in a really heavy-handed way. And we know the judge already made a deal with him by participating in this ritual. Now all the men have made that deal. So going forward, what is the contrast between the kid and Toadvine and everyone else? Have they made that deal with the judge yet? No, not like this. The judge feels like he owns them, right? The kid and Toadvine are still outside of that, but he wants to get them there. If you've taken a picture of this, good on you. Be sure, I'd like you to look at just look at 167 to 9, page 260, page 207, and page 217. On your piece of paper, write down the word brown. Okay, because I said there's a quiz. Write down the word brown. He's someone to keep an eye on. All right, friends. I'll see you on Wednesday.